Okay, can everybody see the presentation screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be speaking about the Education Scholarship Account Program. We'll start off with introductions. I will introduce myself and then my co-host Chris will take over. I'm Jackie Guglielmo. I am the Executive Director of the ESA Program. We're very excited to bring you this interactive information session today. There are a couple others like it on our website, but this is the first that Chris and I are co-hosting together. So I will allow him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Jackie. Again, my name is Chris Vawter. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the Office of the Treasurer, primarily tasked with helping Jackie get this program launched and going this year. It was enacted by our General Assembly, not last session, but the session before. And so we've kind of spent the last year working through the statute. Her and I have both read through it a whole bunch, and now we're at the process where it's about to launch. And so I'm, again, Deputy General Counsel for the office, so I'm providing kind of the legal background and helping us get going. A little bit more about me. I do have, prior to going to law school, I was in education, public education for 2 years. I spent 1 year as a paraprofessional, so I have a passion for working with students with disabilities, and it's transformed into this program, which will hopefully give parents with those with disabilities a lot more options as we move forward.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so let's get started. A little bit about the Indiana ESA, if you haven't heard of it yet. The Education Scholarship Account Program is administered by the Treasurer of State. And our mission is to provide educational flexibility to Hoosier students for their students with disabilities. This is a statewide program offering the opportunity for families to customize their child's educational experience by offering tax-free scholarship dollars to eligible students to spend on pre-approved educational services. If you haven't heard of us before, that's likely because it is brand new. And we're launching for the first time in this upcoming 2022-23 school year. Now, you've noticed in the title that this is a scholarship program, and that's very important to the program. The purpose of it being a scholarship is that it will not impact a family's ability to take advantage of other types of financial aid or assistance. So families can use the Indiana Education Scholarship Account Program simultaneously to things like insurance, Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, free and reduced lunch, and other disability benefits. A little bit about our student eligibility. Chris, is this where you wanted to take over?
Sure, yeah. And so one of the main things we wanted to make sure happens with this program is that we comply with all the statutory guidelines that have been given to us by our General Assembly. And so it's kind of a twofold process. We have student eligibility as well as the providers, which we call participating entities. And so we use a lot of defined terms that are in the statute. And so when we talk about student eligibility, we're talking about eligible students, and that has a defined term in our statute. And by having that, it has the full requirements that you can see here on the screen. So in order to be eligible to be in the program, an eligible student has to have their legal settlement in Indiana. And so the term legal settlement is again defined in our statute, and it's rather complex. And as we all know, that not every situation is perfectly clear. And so the standard definition of legal settlement is the attendance area of where the student's parents reside. And of course, and there are all sorts of unique situations, and both in our parent handbook and on our website, we kind of break down and define further any of those other unique situations. The second requirement, again, at least for this first year, the program is geared towards helping students with disabilities. And so those students are require special education, and they're also, along with that, they're going to have an IEP, an individualized education program, CSEP, which is the Choice Scholarship Education Plan, or also a service plan developed under the Indiana Administrative Code. So again, this first year, this program is geared towards those students. And so moving on to requirement 3, again, logically, it's for students in K through 12. And so, but because we're working with students with disabilities, the age range is both from 5 all the way through 22. And that's for students beginning on August 1st of that each school year for the program. The final element in order to be eligible is an income requirement. And so for those familiar with the choice program, which is another educational option here in the state of Indiana, it aligns with that. And so this program is designed for students whose families have an annual income not to exceed 300% of the federal free and reduced lunch income qualification. And both you can see on the screen here, and in all of our brochures and materials, we have that chart because that number changes each year, but you can get an idea based on your family size on how much you can make in order to qualify. So again, those are the 4 primary requirements to be an eligible student. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about each of those and what we're going to be looking for in order to prove those. And so when a parent applies, again, so we're looking for age 5 to 22. And so when a parent's applying on behalf of their eligible student for this program, we're going to ask that they provide some sort of documentation to show their age. And so typically that would come in the form of something like a birth certificate. As far as the Indiana residency requirement, some sort of tax return or a recent utility bill or other bill like that, or some sort of lease agreement showing where again, each situation is different, but it's typically where the student's parents reside. And so we're looking for any of those types of documents, mails, bills, and so forth. That third requirement, the proof of special education, again, those come in those 3 types of documents: the IEP, the service plan, or the choice education special education plan. And so those are documents that are going to be developed at your local public school corporation. And those documents will be uploaded again to show that your child would be eligible. And that final bucket is the income requirements that we talked about previously. And kind of the gold standard document that we want to see uploaded, preferably, would be a last year's tax return. So the 2021 federal tax return. And we understand that circumstances change, or some people aren't able to acquire those old documents. And so we do have other acceptable forms of documents that we would allow, such as a W-2 form for each member of the household. Same with pay stubs. So a student applying, we would want recent pay stubs from every adult in that household. And so like I said, the primary document that we want would be a tax return. But if that's not available, then we have what's called a household summary. And if we go to our next slide here. So as part of that income verification, it's very important. In this document, if you have a tax return, that's also going to help show your Indiana residency, of course. But in situations where the 2021 tax return isn't available, or the situation has changed, someone has lost a job, a parent is no longer in the household, we'll also have families fill out what's called a household summary form. The same form is used by our choice program. And what it does is going to ask you what is different. For example, say you have a 2021 tax return. If something has changed, it'll ask you what changed. And so as you can see on the screen, you can mark household size has changed. One of the adults in the house has moved out, or someone has moved in. And so what we're going to be asking for to ensure compliance with our statute is that every adult in the house sign the agreement and verify that they're either not working or whatever their household income is. And so again, we don't require that document if you're providing the 2021 federal tax return, because more than likely it's going to show, if you file jointly, the dependent, who would in this case hopefully be the eligible student, as well as potentially anyone else you're filing jointly with. If you have multiple people in the home and they've all filed separate tax returns, we would take those as well, and that would be fine. as long as somewhere in there, one of them is claiming the eligible student who's applying for the program. Or like we said on the previous slide, there are a lot of other documents that we could use to verify the income if something has changed dramatically. So we would want your most recent pay stubs and so forth. So again, those are the 4 requirements to become an eligible student in the program. And those are a variety of the documents that we would accept in order to prove the qualification for each of those. And a lot more information can be found in our parent handbook, as well as some of the materials on our website, but those are just a few of the examples so far.
Thank you, Chris. That's really important information. We want to make sure that everybody's really clear about not only the student eligibility requirements, but the documentation that will be needed and will be reviewed upon application. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of participating entities that can apply to participate in the ESA program and accept ESA funds from student accounts. So these are entities like non-public or public schools. An important note here is that a student may not be enrolled in a public school, but may certainly use ESA funds to purchase a course, a program, or an individual class from a public school or public charter school. ESA funds can be used to pay for services by occupational therapists or other types of therapists, including ABA, speech, equine therapy, music therapy, art therapy, certainly not an exhaustive list. Different providers for assessments and evaluations, specific camps and programs with skill focus. So there's quite a wide variety of the types of services that families can use the ESA funds to pay for. And these specifically the services and therapies really need to be tied to the student's IEP service plan or CSEP. Here are some qualified expenses specifically. So we have tuition and fees, fees for assessments, any fees associated with paraprofessionals or aides. Fee for service transportation is a really important one as well. And what we mean by fee for service transportation is transportation to and from a student's home or approved provider. Individual classes or courses, therapies, and educational services. Now you'll notice a couple of these qualified expenses have an asterisk next to them. The asterisk indicates that this is a qualified expense that may be provided virtually under this year's statute. All other services must be accessed in person. A little bit about a comparison between the ESA program and the choice program that Chris had referenced earlier. For anybody that's not familiar with the choice scholarship program, is a program administered by the Department of Education. It's been in Indiana for about 10 years now, and it's used for tuition and fees at a non-public school. So the same requirement there of a student not being enrolled in a public school, but they have the option of attending a non-public school. Now, I referenced earlier that the importance of this being a scholarship program is that will not inhibit a family's ability to take advantage of other sorts of financial aid. However, this is the only program that a family would not be able to be using simultaneous to the ESA. So if a student qualified for both programs, they would have to choose one or the other for the school year. As I referenced, we have a wide list of different qualified expenses and different types of participating entities that can accept ESA funds as payment for services rendered. For choice, anybody that's using choice understands that is specifically for tuition and fees at a state accredited non-public school. Our application window is a little bit different than the choice scholarship program. We do have this one phase of applications. Applications for families are currently open and will close on August 5th. Provider application, so that means any type of participating entity, including schools, the application for them is open and rolling. So there is no close date for those applications. All payments will be made from a family through their scholarship account on a secure online portal in a direct pay method with vendors. So when vendors come on board as entities in our program, they're going to submit some payment ACH direct deposit information so that families can use ESA funds to pay for those services directly through our portal. We're really excited and proud of the ESA and the options that it offers for Hoosier students with disabilities. Families can use these funds to really customize and create the educational setting that best meets the needs of their students. So that may be a non-public school setting, or that could look different. That could be a family opting to go to an ABA center or educate at home or hire a tutor. It really is just about meeting the needs of the individual student and assuring their academic success. We're also really excited about the fact that families can use the ESA funds for fee-for-service transportation, as I mentioned, to and from approved providers and home. So if the family has difficulty accessing a particular provider, whether that be because of distance or time of day, they can certainly search our portal for approved transportation providers and use ESA funds to pay for that service.
Earlier,
Yep. Go ahead, Chris.
sorry, Jackie.
Nope, that's
Earlier we covered some of the just fundamental requirements for an eligible student to participate in the program. There are also some additional requirements that once a student is eligible and accepted, that they must maintain in order to maintain an account. And so going through a few of those, this isn't a comprehensive list, as we list more on our website, and it'll be in the parent agreement that anyone registering for the program would be advised of at that time. And one of the requirements of the program is that parents use part of the money in the account of the eligible student in the study areas of reading, grammar, mathematics, social studies, or science, or in accordance with the eligible student's IEP, service plan, choice scholarship plan, or a 504 plan. So the programs and services that are being provided, some of the money needs to be used in those areas. Also, it's a very important one. So traditionally, if a student is in a public school or otherwise, they're going to be taking the statewide assessments that are required for that eligible student based on their grade level or specified in their plan. So in order to participate in this program, since we are using state dollars, an eligible student is going to be required to take those assessments. And so depending on how they use the funds from the ESA, parents may need to seek out locations and providers that provide those type of assessments based on the child's requirements. One of the eligible participating entities in our program is what we call a qualified school. The qualified school, if a student is enrolled there and using their ESA funds, will likely be taking the statewide assessment at that location. And so that's not something that a parent would probably need to worry about in that situation. But if a parent of an eligible student is choosing to do kind of an a la carte or taking their student to a lot of different places using the ESA funds, that it is important that they remember that the student will still be required to take those statewide exams based on their grade level. And the other requirement is that an account established for a student is available for 1 year while the student is in K through 12. So again, while we talked earlier that a student could be eligible between the ages of 5 and 22, the program is going to terminate once that student has received a diploma or a receipt of completion or graduation. And so again, while there are students above 18 that are still in the system, this particular account will terminate once they've reached a graduation or received a certificate of completion. So those are some of the additional requirements that need to be considered.
Okay, so I'd like to describe a little bit about how the grant award is calculated. Every student's grant award is calculated individually and is based on 2 components. The first component is tuition support that the student's school corporation of legal settlement would be receiving. So that's the local school corporation where the student resides. That student is eligible for 90% of that tuition support. And again, that's based on school corporation. Every school corporation would have a different tuition support amount. The next component is what's called APC funds, which stands for additional pupil count. And APC funds are basically state special education funds, and they're based on the student's categorization of disability. That information is found in the IEP, CSEP, or individualized service plan. Usually it will have a primary and secondary designation of a disability. And each one of those categories of disabilities, which is set by the Department of Education, carries a different award amount. We have enabled a grant award estimator on our website that any family can access as a guest without having to register or apply for the program. You would be able to key in what your student's local school corporation is, and from their documentation, gather the primary and or secondary disability that's listed on their documentation and estimate what your grant award would be for the year. Parents will have access to the ESA funds via an education scholarship account that's established after the approval of your application for the program. We're using a vendor called Class Wallet, which some might be familiar with because they've been in this space for quite some time, helping ESAs around the country to establish their programs. And we here in Indiana also use it for tax credit and other sorts of financial aid through the school system. So some may be familiar with that platform. You would be, once the eligible student is approved, an email would be sent out from Class Wallet to establish the account. Families will have 4 quarterly disbursements provided into their account throughout the school year. So those payments will be made mid-August, beginning of October, beginning of January, and beginning of April. There is no cap on the account. As I mentioned, it's just based on those 2 components, the tuition support amount and the APC funds, and that will give you the total grant award for the year. You just divide it into 4, you'll get what the 4 quarterly disbursement amounts will be. And a really exciting feature of our program is that it's not a use it or lose it system. So up to $1,000 per year cumulatively can be rolled over each year without impacting future disbursements. So if by the end of year 1, that family has $1,000 remaining in their account, that can roll over into year 2, and the total grant award amount would still remain the same as long as other components like the legal school of legal settlement and APC funds remain the same. If that family doesn't use an additional $1,000, they could potentially go into year 3 with $2,000 rolled over from previous years. So that's the cumulative factor there, which is really nice. Especially for families that are starting with younger children that may want to pursue either a private high school or pre-vocational programs or other courses as their student grows through K-12. That will be nice to have those additional funds rolled over. A little bit about how payments are made. So there's a graphic representation on the left and a description on the right. So first and foremost, a service must be rendered in order for a family to be able to pay for it. So a parent is going to contact a provider if they feel that provider will meet the needs of their student and the provider agrees to provide services to the student, then they're going to enter into that relationship. Services will occur, and then a provider will be responsible for giving an invoice to the family detailing the services that are rendered and the total amount owed to the provider. At that time, the family will upload that invoice, and it's a pretty intuitive process. You could do it with a scanner, or the provider can provide it to you electronically, or you can even take a photo with your phone and upload it into our payment platform. A family will then be able to select the vendor and initiate payment by typing in the total amount of that invoice. It then comes to our team of account specialists who are reviewing all expenses that come through the system. And that's really for the protection of the family to ensure that there was no transposition error and that they selected the correct vendor that they want to be paying that matches the invoice. And then we go ahead and approve the payment and goes direct deposit to the provider's account. If there's a remaining balance owed by the family after the ESA funds have been exhausted, families can absolutely use other payment methods to pay that remaining balance to the provider directly. So for example, if an invoice comes through, a family has exhausted their ESA, that provider may accept a check, a credit card, any other sort of payment outside of ESA if that family does not have a balance left in their account but owes an invoice payment to a provider for services rendered. Families can still bill through insurance. So if you are paying for a service or a therapy through your insurance, Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, you absolutely may still do that. Insurance must be processed first. And then if there's a remaining balance owed to the provider by the family can use the ESA funds to pay that remaining balance to the provider. So it does not inhibit a family's ability to continue to bill through insurance. And that is regardless of whether the deductible has been met or not. Really, we just need that invoice from the provider for what is owed to the provider for the service. The service can still absolutely count toward the family's deductible. So we've referenced our portal a couple of times. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the capabilities of the ESA portal. Our portal is accessible from any device. So you can access it if you have a laptop or Chromebook or tablet, a smartphone. You'd be able to access our portal on any one of those devices. The portal is where we house our applications, both for providers and for families, the estimator tool that I referenced earlier, and a search portal, which I think of kind of like an ESA Google. So families will be able to select criteria that they'd like to search from and search within our portal for providers and schools who are already approved to accept ESA funds. So a family wouldn't be in a position where they'd have to call a provider and ask, are you accepting ESA? They can have access to a full list, and there is a printed list available on our ESA website now under our resources tab. I mentioned the grant award estimator, and I'll do a short walkthrough of that after this slide, where families can access the information about their local school corporation, primary and or secondary disability categories on their student's IEP service plan or CSEP, and calculate an estimated annual grant award amount. What's coming soon is our search portal. That's not been completely finalized yet, but can anticipate that in the next couple of weeks for families to select perhaps the type of service they're looking for, the radius from their home, zip code, and languages that they'd like the service provided in, and be able to search our portal for appropriate providers. Here's our estimator tool. So when you select that you would like to apply as an eligible student, you will see this first screen here where it almost looks like a login screen, but you can see circled down at the bottom that there's an option to estimate your scholarship as a guest, which will not require registration or application. It will then take you to this screen that you can see here on the right, where it states select student school corporation. Now, this is an intuitive free-form box. So what that means is as soon as you start typing your student school corporation, you will see a list populate that meets those, that matches what you're typing in. So for example, I might type in INDIA and it might populate with Indianapolis Public Schools. So it's a nice intuitive tool there. Then down below, you'll see some check boxes. So you would check off the categorizations of the disabilities that correspond to the disabilities that are listed on your child's documentation. Our system is also intuitive, and then you cannot select more than one disability per category. So you would not be able to select two that are considered a primary diagnosis. Just a screenshot for those who might not be familiar with the entire IEP document. This is where you would find the eligibility for your student. It's under the eligibility category of the IEP, stating that the student is eligible for special education services, which, as Chris referenced earlier, is an eligibility qualification for our program. And then here in this completely mock IEP, we have a primary disability of emotional disability and a secondary of deafblind. So that's where that information would come from. Once you've entered that information specific to your student, you would see an estimated scholarship amount. So you'll see here that the amounts are clearly indicated by whether it's school corporation and then disability level, and then what the total award amount would be. So for this particular student whose school corporation is IPS, has a primary disability of multiple disabilities and a secondary disability of speech language impairment, their total grant award amount would be just above $17,000. Class wallet, I'm going to pass along to you, Chris.
Thank you, Jackie. And Jackie already covered some of this with you. And so Class Wallet is it's another company that we've partnered with to help us with this program. They're going to be handling the financial component of this. And so unlike in some other states where participants in the ESA programs are given things such as a debit card or an account where they can spend money, kind of like a Amazon type of account, we're using Class Wallet. And after on that previous screen, you saw the estimator portal. And so once a family has applied and a student has been approved to participate in the program, they'll get an email from Class Wallet and they'll set up a separate account with Class Wallet. In that account, you'll see the total amount, the grant amount that they are going to receive. But again, it's never going to, families aren't going to have direct access to that. It's only going to be able to be used to reimburse for the qualified expenses in the program. And so while you're going to see the entire grant amount made for that entire school year, disbursements are made in quarterly payments. And so the account will be funded in quarterly disbursements. And again, for the most part, you'll be able to, once services are rendered from the participating entities, providing the services to your student, they will give you an invoice and you will look it over. You will upload it into the account and submit it for payment. And at that point, once we've verified that the services rendered are qualified for this program, we would then approve them, and then the money would leave your account and be deposited into the accounts of the different participating entities. There are exceptions on how that would work, depending if your student is enrolled in a qualified school. But for the most part, the method's going to remain the same, that your account's going to be funded in quarterly disbursements, and you'll have a limited access to that. It's not something that a parent can withdraw into their own personal accounts. And depending on the services rendered, you're not going to be receiving any money back from the participating entity based on the money in your account. So it's going to be visible, and you'll be able to watch as it's transferred once you've submitted the invoices and the different the expenses are approved by our, we have people working that will review those based on the invoices and matching them up with the services that were promised and rendered. Another thing, both in this aspect and in some of the documents being uploaded, it is a fairly intuitive process. You can upload, whether it be a PDF, you could take an image or take a photo of the invoice and you could upload it in that manner. And so we'll be able to receive that in a lot of different ways to hopefully make it as easy as possible on the families as they upload the documents. And again, Class Wallet being its own separate entity, they have their own support staff that will also be able to help in situations in which our staff wouldn't be able to help you.
Thank you, Chris. And just to add to that, we will have resources on our website provided to us from Class Wallet additionally. So you will absolutely have resources sent to you via Class Wallet, but our website will also be a good resource for families who are approved and are setting up their account on how to establish that account, how to log in, how to make payments, et cetera. So there are some videos and some screenshots depending on what best meets your needs, but we will help to provide those resources as well. That is it for our presentation today. Just as a reminder, applications for eligible students and providers are both open. However, the application deadline for students is August 5th. So we have about 3 weeks left of our application period. And we do have funds remaining to provide grants. So if you're interested, and we can answer any questions for you prior to you pursuing application. I see that there are a couple in the chat, so we'll start to go through those. This is our ESA email, so please feel free if you have any follow-up questions, if anything comes to mind following our presentation today, you can feel free to email us at esa@tos.in.gov. This is a phone number to our outreach and engagement coordinator, Emma. She will be happy to answer questions for anybody as well. And this is a QR code that takes you directly to our agency home landing page. So as Chris referenced earlier, most of the information that you've heard today is also available on our website. We have a specific page for families, one for providers, one dedicated to applications, and one dedicated to resources as well. So really, it's a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about ESA. Also on our website, you'll find a link to our YouTube informational channel, where I've created about 7 informational videos that are about 4 minutes a piece. So they're a quick, easy listen, and they're on focused content topics. So if there's anything that you needed more information about or wanted to pursue, you can watch one of those videos or all of the video series as well. So I'm going to hop over to the chat. I'll read the question aloud in case nobody else is looking at it to hear what the question is. And then Chris and I will go ahead and answer those questions. As I'm going through these questions, please feel free to add to the chat if you generate any other questions. So thank you to those who kind of pointed out the noise and the volume. Sorry there. Hope we were understandable and clear and everyone could hear us. First question, so if a student is enrolled in a public school but has tutoring or ABA therapy, he won't qualify. A student may not be enrolled in the public school and use the ESA. So can be enrolled for the 21-22 school year, but once accepting an ESA, enrollment in a public school is not an option of the ESA. Could parents use funds for one-on-ones for their child? Sherry, hi, Dr. Anderson, good to see you here. If you're talking about kind of a one-to-one paraprofessional or aide, that fees for paraprofessionals and aides are ESA qualified expenses. So yes, they would be able to pay for that. Now, an important distinction I want to make there, and Chris, please feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything. If a student is in a school setting, so again, we're talking about a non-public school primarily, or perhaps they may be purchasing a course or a program or a class from a public school, public charter school. But typically when a student is enrolled in a school setting, that school setting is following the IEP or service plan. Or, once children are enrolled in our program for the coming year, we're working with Department of Education to create what's going to be called a education scholarship account service plan. That school needs to meet the needs of that student. So the school would typically provide the paraprofessional or aide at no cost to the student. However, if there's an alternate special education provision setting, then yes, fees that are associated with paraprofessional or aides can be funded through the ESA. Chris, anything to add there?
No, I think you covered it, Jackie.
Okay. Okay, the next question here is, would dyslexia be covered? So what I'll go ahead and pull up is the, give me a minute. I will pull up the APC form, which is also on our website and within our parent handbook. Here we go. Okay, is this visible to everybody?
No, not really, Jackie.
Okay,
Still
let's try
showing
that
the
again.
slideshow.
Can we see it now?
Yep, it's on there.
Okay, perfect. So this is public facing information that can be found on the Department of Education's website, and it details the 3 categorizations of the disability. So to answer your question there, we don't specifically look at the disability and determine eligibility in the program based on which disability the student has. We look at their eligibility for special education, and then the categorization of their disability dictates the APC funding that would be allotted to that student. So I don't see dyslexia specifically on here, but it could perhaps, again, you're referencing the CSEP, the IEP, or the service plan. It may be found under language or speech impairment. It really is dictated by what's in that student's documentation. As a student with a 504 eligible to apply, or must they have an IEP or CSEP? So that's a great question. They must have an IEP, CSEP, or service plan. A 504 document is not an eligibility requirement because a student wouldn't necessarily require special education just because they have a 504. Those accommodations could be provided to a student who's simply accessing general education. So that's why that's not an eligibility document. However, we do reference it in terms of state testing and accommodations.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that same thing. So it is referenced in our statute. It's just not one of the eligibility documents that a student would be permitted to have at the forefront. but it is something that's considered later on when taking those assessments, as Jackie said.
Our next question is, there is a shortage of licensed special ed teachers in our area. I have my degree and would only need a couple courses to renew. Can I be a provider for my child? It's another fantastic question. So it's a rule administratively in the Education Scholarship Account Program that a parent or guardian cannot be a direct provider of services for their student. So no, unfortunately, you would not be able to provide educational and pay yourself to be an education provider for that student. What about homeschooling? And I would love a little bit more information about what you're looking for about homeschooling. Are you asking if homeschooled students are eligible for this? Okay, great. So yes, students that are educating at home are absolutely eligible. The student must have one of those documents developed for them. And I know in some cases, students that are homeschooled or educating at home might not have those documents developed if they've never visited the public school corporation for an evaluation. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. Students don't need to educate in a brick and mortar school setting. They can absolutely educate at home. It's important to note, though, that curriculum and curricular materials are not qualified expenses. So you would not be able to purchase a curriculum or any sort of curricular materials with ESA funds. But you could certainly pay for those by other means and then use ESA funds for any other wraparound services or therapies that would meet the needs of your student. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I see that she's written in dyslexia is usually under specific learning disability. Thank you for that clarification. To clarify, are students attending a charter school eligible? Charter schools are considered public schools. So no, the student would not be able to be enrolled in a charter school and take advantage of the ESA. Okay, I see that that's the last question in our chat. Did anybody else have any questions about any of the material that we presented today? Okay, well, thank you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Anderson. I see you in there. Yes.
Okay, this is just something that I've thought about. So if, let's say we have a student who is half day at an ABA program and then goes half day to a public school, would ESA funding be able to help with the half day at the ABA facility?
That's a great question. We've worked pretty closely with Department of Education to get some guidance on that. And, you know, again, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can comfortably say that their response was that a student that is enrolled in a public school less than 50% of the time is typically not included in the ADM count and therefore would be eligible for the ESA. So we encourage the family to, if that's the arrangement for their student, which I've actually been asked a couple of times by a few ABA centers around the state. So thank you so much for bringing that question up. That I would suggest that the family reach out to that public school corporation and ensure that their student is not being counted in the ADM count because of their status as less than a full-time enrolled student.
One thing that I just thought of, we listed those eligibility documents, and once you have those, the student's already going to have a student test number, an STN. That is also something that a student's going to have at the outset when applying for this program, because again, we're partnered with the Department of Education for a lot of our data exchanges, and so for some students who've never had any connection or they're aging in, that haven't even been to a public school whatsoever at this point, that is something that will need to be done. But again, it's going to be kind of redundant based on those eligibility documents because it's going to come with those as well. But an STN is something that a student will need at the outset when applying for the program.
That's a good point, Chris. If IEP calls for communication device, can one be purchased for homeschooling? No, so any sort of device or material or item is not considered a qualified expense for the program. So, and I apologize, I think I missed a question up at the top. So I remembered seeing something about that. Can funds be used for iPads, headphones, sensory items? No, not at this time. Those are not considered qualified expenses. However, when I speak with therapists and families alike, I reiterate that if that item is necessary for therapy and that the therapeutic provider is charging a certain amount because that item or device is utilized during the therapy, the family is paying for the therapy, that can be incorporated into their therapy, but a family would not be able to use the ESA funds to pay for the device directly.
To build off that before we move on to that next question from Dr. Anderson, one thing that we didn't dive too deeply into was the category of the qualified expenses. They are mentioned on one of the slides previously, but Jackie also has other informational videos that she mentioned that cover those a little more in depth on what would be allowed. And so it's very important because a parent could get their child enrolled in this program, an entity could get approved, but the services that we're going to be paying for with the ESA funds have to match that qualified expenses category. And so these are great questions. And so I would ask that you read all of the materials that we present in the parent handbook, watch those other informational sessions that Jackie's prepared, because it's going to break those down. And more than likely, the participating entity that your child is attending, they're going to want to make sure that the services they're providing are qualified because they want to receive the payment as well. And so just make sure once you a child is enrolled and you're working with your participating entity, that whatever service you're seeking from them is on that list. And so again, at least this year, as we start our program here, those tangible type of items, the iPads and so forth, while they may be required for the different levels of services needed, those aren't necessarily going to fall under the qualified expenses category, at least not this year. So work with, review all the materials in the other videos. We didn't dive into that as much in this particular one, but there are others out there that talk more about those different types of expenses that can be used using the ESA funds.
Thank you, Chris. And I included in the chat for everybody a link directly to our parent page of our ESA website. So if you scroll down to that, to kind of the middle / bottom of that page, you'll see the types of participating entities and the qualified expenses there. From that page, you can navigate over to the resources page. The resources page has the links to the both our social media as well as our YouTube channel that Chris referenced. So if from our resources page, you can get to the YouTube videos and I dive a little bit deeper into all the qualified expenses and types of participating entities there as well. And there's links right there to email us. So if after you've watched the video specific to that content, you have more questions, you can go ahead and email us or give us a call at that phone number. Yeah, Dr. Anderson, you can go ahead and come off mute and ask the question.
Okay, y'all, I hope I get this right. So I am thinking about talking with a non-public school leader, that would be the principal or perhaps the superintendent of the organization, and asking them to encourage parents to think about, getting an ESA account. I have had some informal conversations with people like that, and there's been a little hesitancy. And can you give me a statement, a link that would show that this would be great for their school? It's like they may be missing out on funding, and I just want to know how to respond.
Excuse me. I'm happy to pass along some resources that we've created for qualified schools, Dr. Anderson, but I think really the best course of action is for us to team up together to do either an info session or a Zoom call with that school. I've spoken with dozens of non-public schools across the state, so I'm pretty aware of what their hesitancies are. it's not a lot I haven't heard yet. So I'm happy to team up with you and have that conversation, because I can in real time kind of talk through any concerns they might have or questions they might have. You know, we really did that early on in the process, participating. Thank you so much for participating. We did that early on in the process and got to know what the concerns were, and really tried to even rectify those through legislative session, because it was so important for them to be heard and you know, those concerns to be identified and worked through. So happy, you know, we can kind of exchange an email and work through that together. And I'm happy to jump on a call with you, Dr. Anderson. What questions should I ask a doctor to receive an IEP for my student if homeschooled? We already received diagnosis of anxiety and developmental delays from doctor. However, schools have not given an IEP. Monique, I think maybe you and I can hop to an email exchange on this. Would love to get some more information from you that I don't want you to have to put in the chat, but would love to speak with you a little bit further. So the public schools have a federal responsibility under a law called Child Find to respond to a request for an evaluation. And there are laws around that. There's timeframes around that. So I can certainly provide you some resources about that law and that process, but would love to get some more information from you offline. So let me go ahead and put my email address in the chat here. And you can go ahead and email me and we can speak further about that. I'm a waiver case manager who serves a family whose autistic daughter attended elementary school in the past. She has an expired IEP. Mom currently homeschools. Nope, it has to be a valid IEP, because we have to verify that the student is a disability, is a student with a disability at the time of the application. I am well aware that if the student has a diagnosis of autism, that's not going anywhere. However, that is how our statute is written, and we need to respect the letter of the law there. So again, it's kind of that same situation I was referencing with Monique's question, that public school does have a federal responsibility to reevaluate that student, even if they're not enrolled in the public school and not intending to enroll in the public school. They do have to respond to a request for an evaluation, which would provide that family the documentation they would need to be eligible. Once the family is enrolled, so initially applies and is approved for an ESA, but is not receiving services from a public school or non-public school, they're likely going to be provided what's called the Education Scholarship Account Service Plan. And so they would renew every 3 years with a local public school agency. So it wouldn't be an annual requirement anymore, but every 3 years they would need to request a reevaluation for determination of eligibility of special education services. Any other questions from anybody? Give it another minute. And I want to thank everybody for your participation today. This is a lot of information. As I referenced at the beginning of the call, we are recording. So we're going to go ahead and post this recording right on our website for everybody to be able to view and reference. Again, there are a ton of resources on our website. So please use those resources, watch the videos, read the material. Our website is also translatable into any language that you can find on Google Translate. So if you are working with a family or are a family who would like this information in a different language, that is accessible on our website. It doesn't look like any other questions are coming through, so I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you everybody for your time. I hope this was helpful and informative for you. We look forward to seeing your applications come through. As a reminder, parent applications are closing on August 5th. So you want to make sure that you are ready for the process and have the documentation that you will need to apply. I also mentioned at the beginning that we have recorded a walkthrough of our application. So you can actually watch that video and preview exactly what the application will look like in preparation for registering and beginning your application. So that's also a very helpful resource that we've put out there for families. Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon.